you've ever had a wild blackberry from your creek and that vitality and freshness in your mouth. Like I can taste it when I explain it. And that's kind of the goal, is like, if Mother Nature plays the bigger role and we only do what's absolutely necessary, it's going to have that vitality and freshness to it. So when I took over the farming in 2012, I basically just started eliminating things. We haven't fertilized the vineyard in 30 years. We started eliminating all these inputs that the previous farming companies were doing.
Right.
And I think the wines have just gotten more and more pure throughout the process. So I think that's always the goal. Like Alex said earlier, is if you have a great site, it's more of a don't screw it up.
Welcome to Uncorking What's Next. I'm your host, Jeff Zachariah. I've spent 40 years in the wine world, and right now may be the most exciting time to be in it. For 4 decades, I led Zacky's, one of the most trusted names in the wine business. Along the way, I met collectors, winemakers, and thinkers who changed how I see this world, because wine has always been more than what's in the glass. It's about connection, curiosity, and the stories we share. I'm really enjoying uncorking its future together with you. I discovered MacDonald Vineyards from the auction podium, a wine I'd never heard of, with bidders going absolutely crazy. I came off the podium, turned to my son Tom, and said, "What is this?" He gave me that look that said, "Dad, how do you not know about MacDonald Vineyards?" Alex and Graeme MacDonald are 4th-generation farmers on one of the most storied pieces of ground in American wine. 15 rocky acres in the heart of To Kalon in Oakville, planted by great-grandparents who, by the way, didn't even want to buy the land. Their family grapes were the backbone of Mondavi's best blends going all the way back to 1966, the Reserve, the To Kalon label, and early Opus One. And it was all on a handshake going back to the mid-60s. The brothers released the first vintage in 2010, 92 cases, and it sold out in a mere 25 minutes. Today, MacDonald Vineyards has become one of the most sought-after wines in Napa. Not built through marketing or scale, but through an obsession with sight, tradition, and restraint, letting the vineyard speak and trying not to get in the way. It's just the two of them, no employees. One focuses mainly on the winemaking and the other mainly on business. And they're also waging a 5-year battle, solo, no lawyers, to protect the very concept of place in American wine. I was very excited to sit down with Alex and Graeme to talk about that journey and what it really means to steward something truly special. This is their story. Let's get into it. Today's episode is brought to you by La Tête d'Or, the French-American steakhouse from legendary chef Daniel Boulud in Manhattan's Flatiron District, serving one of the best lunches in New York. I had the pleasure of working with Chef Boulud over the years, hosting wine auctions together at Restaurant Daniel and dining at many of his amazing restaurants. I've never been disappointed. So I was very excited to see what he's created at La Tête d'Or. It brings together the spirit of classic American steakhouse with refined French flair. Great steaks, incredible seafood, and a fantastic wine list. If you're in New York and looking for a memorable lunch, La Tête d'Or is absolutely worth a visit. It gets my highest recommendation. Welcome to Uncorking What's Next, the podcast where I sit down with people shaping the future of wine. I'm your host, Jeff Zachariah, and I have 2 guests on today who I think embody everything this show's about, Alex and Graeme MacDonald from MacDonald Vineyards. Thank you both very much for coming on to the show.
Our pleasure. Thanks so much for including us. We're excited to be able to share our story with your listeners.
For people who know your vineyard, MacDonald is almost mythical for like me. But for those who don't, how would you describe MacDonald Vineyard in one sentence?
Gee, I think both Graeme and I think of it so much as, our family legacy. And, I feel like we're so lucky to be able to have a family story and history that dates back over 70 years that we get to share with people.
I'd also add the rockiest, most old vines in To Kalon.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant addition to it, too. And the whole story is great. I remember when I first discovered MacDonald was actually on the auction podium. And all of a sudden, there was a group of California wines, and there was a couple lots of MacDonald. And I saw the bidding. There was a lot of active bidding. And I'm going, what is this winery? I don't think I know this. Came off the podium and went to my son, Tom. Alex, you've met him. And I said, what is this? And he gave me a look like, okay, boomer, how can you not know what MacDonald Vineyards is, right? And so I said, all right, I better study it. A couple years later, we came to visit you. And now I've done a bunch of research for this podcast, and I've really been enjoying it. So good, I'm excited. I hope the listeners appreciate it as much. You guys, as you said, are fourth generation grape growers, farming in one of the most storied plots in American wine history. But from what I read, your grandparents, they didn't want to buy the land. Can you share a little of that story for us?
Yeah, so our great grandparents actually came to the west side of Oakville back in 1954, and our great grandfather was actually a cattle farmer up in Lake County, which is a little bit northeast of the Napa Valley. But when he retired, he just said, "Hey, you know what? I want to find a place that's beautiful and relaxing where I can spend the rest of my life." And he came across this property and immediately fell in love with the house. And so he goes to the woman who was selling it. Her name was Caroline Stelling, and said, "You know, Mrs. Stelling, I'd love to put an offer on your house. What's your asking price?" And she said, "Well, I'm actually not just selling the house, I'm also selling land. And the only way I'll let you buy this house is if you buy at least 30 acres of land around it." And apparently our great grandparents at first said, "You know, absolutely not. The last thing we want is land." And our great grandfather, the ranch he managed, was like 20,000 acres. So any bit of land to him was looked at as work.
Right.
So our great uncle actually wrote a memoir. So we're very fortunate to have some of these stories firsthand. But he said that the initial asking price was $600 per acre. Our great grandparents negotiated it down to $400 an acre, and apparently we're still very upset that they had to buy the land.
Yeah.
So a great story of better to be lucky than smart sometimes.
Yeah, and often you hear stories where people, their full intention was to buy to make wine, and that was the opposite initially for your great grandparents, right?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, people were still very hesitant to get back in the grape growing business. You know, prohibition had been repealed for a while, but
Sure.
these are actually the great grandparents. One of the first people they talked to was Robert Mondavi, and he was the one that convinced them to plant it to a vineyard. And it was some of the first grapes planted in To Kalon after prohibition had been repealed.
And I just want to talk for a little bit about your upbringing for both of you. Did both your parents work outside the home?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, our dad was a banker for most of his career, and when Alex and I got interested in the family farm, grandmother was really excited. She was like, "Someday this could be yours, and I can't wait for you to make a wine." And everyone else in the family was skeptical. They said we should be doctors or lawyers, and that farming is a hard life and hard work. So, of course, when you're a kid and someone tells you not to do something, that's exactly what you get interested in.
Exactly. Right. I tried that many times with my kids. It didn't work with them.
Yeah.
And Graham's an amazing case because he somehow knew at age 16 he was going to be a winemaker. So he was on that path to go to UC Davis and do viticultureology at a very young age. And I ended up getting into UC Berkeley and decided to go through the business and law programs there. But before we had any real understanding of how special this property was or what it could be, Graeme actually approached the family and said, "Hey, I'm kind of interested in using some of the family grapes to make some wine, and we'd be the first in 4 generations to do it. How exciting could this be?" And family looked at us and said, "You know what? I think it's a really stupid idea." And they said, "You're too young, you're inexperienced, nobody makes money in the wine business. We've got a good thing going selling the grapes." And so we walked away a little discouraged, but talked about it a little more and went back to the family and said, "Hey, just to be clear, we're offering to buy the grapes." And one of the aunts looks at us, she goes, "Oh, if you're going to buy it, we don't care. You can do anything you want now."
Didn't you say at market value?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we've
Yeah.
always paid the same price that for a long time we were selling grapes to the Mondavi family, and it was always to make sure all the family was happy that we would pay the same price to ensure that my mom and our aunts and everybody were taken care of. And our grandmother retired and was able to live her life by as the vineyard became more and more supportive. So it was always important for
Nice.
us to pay it forward. And Graeme has one of my favorite quotes of all time about our family. He says, "Our family is extremely generous, just not monetarily." Um, but being able to have access to this vineyard and make the wines that we are, so far is just such a special opportunity.
Yeah, and as can you imagine, Jeff, it's the market value is pretty high here for two working kids with no nest egg. So there came a point in the business at year 3 where we had never sold any wine, and we wrote the family a check that was 3 times the size of our combined life savings, and asked them to cash it in a month, and that's when we did our first release.
Wow. That's sitting on the edge for sure. That's amazing. That's amazing. And coming all the way back, Graeme, farming from what I looked at was in your blood, right? As a kid, you were into farming. And you just naturally came into winemaking from that, or did that take some time?
Yeah, I mean, I joined because of the farming. Like that was my love and growing things and plants. So my preliminary interest was just vines.
Right.
And then shortly thereafter, I realized that you don't just send your kids off to college and never see them again. So the idea of growing grapes and then disconnecting was hard for me to manage. So I forced myself onto the wine side as well to balance that. And thankfully at Davis, it didn't used to be this way, but now they combine the education. So it used to be in the 70s that you're either a winemaker or vineyard manager. And there's a whole series of problems culturally with separating that because then they become adversarial. And I
Right.
never wanted to do it that way. I wanted to go from the farming to the winemaking. And that was a easy choice for me.
I read that you did some winemaking in your college dorm room.
Yeah, to the dismay of all my roommates. So
That's what I was going to
uh,
ask.
the first six vintages were experimental, and it's as a young winemaker, you're trying to start as early as possible because maybe you have 30 or 40 vintages to do in your life, and so you better get your mistakes out of your system. So we experimented for 6 years trying all the questions: high ripeness, low ripeness, new oak, used oak,
Oh, that's
on a
great.
small scale. And then I did sweat equity for the family, driving tractor, doing whatever I needed to do to purchase the grapes from them. And so I've ruined a lot of wine in college, and so I wouldn't have to do it when it was time to sell.
That's brilliant, and that's what college is all about, and that's what
Yeah.
young learning is all about: is experimenting and trying those things. Right? That's really true. And Alex, you're on the business side of it as well. But what drew you from business back into making the wine, or being involved in the wine at least?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it was Graham. And it's just the two of us. We don't have any employees. And so, even though there's this division, I mean, Graham's involved in all aspects of the business, and I try to help out as much as in the winemaking and vineyard as possible as well. But he was the one that always said, "Hey, if you guys, if you finish up your degree at Cal, you could come and help run the business side. I can farm the vineyard and make the wine. It would be kind of a great combo." And I think we both underestimated, being young guys, how well our skill sets kind of work together. We
Oh.
beat each other up a lot as a kid, and him being the older brother, it was usually more one sided
Yeah,
than
yeah.
giving credit.
Contradict the we.
Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
and I notice you're higher in the podcast too. You're sitting higher. It's all part of the.
He grew bigger out of necessity, so I don't mess with him anymore.
but no, I was always playing sports. I played baseball my life, and then going to Cal, realized pretty quickly I was not going to be a professional baseball player when the competition gets to that level. But it really kind of pushed me in the direction to think about, hey, what do I really want to do? And one of the kind of interesting moments was when I graduated from Cal. It was 2008, so the economy crashed, and nobody was getting jobs. It was really tough time to kind of try to figure out what the next step was. And what was interesting was all my friends and mentors were saying, go back to school, go get a business degree, get a law degree, whatever. And I reached out to all my friends and people who graduated from law school, and they all were like, don't do it. We hate our lives. Like, it's miserable. And then all my friends who were at business school were like, it's amazing. All we do is party all the time. It's not about class. It's about networking. And, neither of those really seemed like this, solution to the issue. And, just between Graham and the wine business, it seemed like a really interesting path. So my first job I got about 6 months after graduating was working at Robert Mondavi Winery doing tours, tastings, and sales. And from that point until now, I've worked and tried to work in almost every single aspect of the business side, and kind of put together almost like a grad school through working, whether it was hospitality, wine importing, distributing. I worked in the cellar for a year. All those things really helped grow my understanding and information of how I could apply this to MacDonald and do a great job of complimenting Graham. It's great to have mentors because you really have to learn from other people in this industry. As Graham mentioned, you get 30 or 40 vintages. We started a little bit early, and hopefully we last long enough to get past those 40 vintages. But, doing something 40 times is not a lot. So
No.
it's really important to have great people to give you guidance and mentorship.
Yeah, and you're part of the industry. You really, once a year, you're really doing something once a year. So any change can be, is really material. So you have to really be aware of what you're doing. If we can go back in time a little bit, right? For 60 years, your family's grapes were the backbone of some of the most legendary wines made in the United States. But yet, I believe it was all done on a handshake. Can you just share a little of the history with us?
When our family was trying to figure out who was going to buy the grapes after the vineyard was established and we were getting crops, they searched around and The one they found was Bob Mondavi, and he was still at Charles Krug, where he was before he started Robert Mondavi Winery. So Bob said he'd take him, and our great uncle, who was the family lawyer, did a contract. And I think in his memoir it said that the first contract was going to be 3 years at $165 a ton, and he felt pretty good about that until harvest came and the market value skyrocketed to like $200 a ton because of some glut or whatever. And so he's kicking himself thinking, oh my God, we just got into the wine business and we could barely pay our property taxes. And I've signed a three-year deal. And so when the check came in the mail, it wasn't for the contracted price. It was for the market value from Bob.
Wow. Okay.
And the next year, same thing happened again. Price went up to $225 or whatever it was. Bob pays the market value, not the contract. So our Uncle Gunn, as we called him, who was like a 6'7", olivey, very wrinkly guy, very intimidating as kids, goes into Bob's office with the contract he wrote and starts ripping it up in front of him, puts it on his desk and says, we don't need a contract, just a handshake. So we kept that handshake going for almost 50 years before Robert Mondavi sold to Constellation Brands.
It's a great story. It's a great business story. So much of our business used to be on a handshake as well, right? And when you can do business that way, it's really amazing. It's a nice way to do it. Bob Mondavi sold it to Constellation. Then what happened?
Then there was a really big contract after that. The trust needed to be rebuilt for good reason. Yeah. So for about 15 years, we continued selling grapes to Constellation. And so our grapes, when Bob was at Krug, it was the core of their special selection. Right. And then at Robert Mondavi, like in 66, Bob bought 12 acres. And so he really, all those early Mondavis until him and Peter were able to divvy up his share of Krug came in part from growers like our family were the core of those, the 66, all that era. And then at one point, Bob started a To Kalon label. And so our grapes became the core of that, sometimes 80-90% of that blend. Traditionally, maybe like 25 to a third of the Mondavi Reserve, and then a lot of the early Opus Ones as well.
Amazing. And Bob Mondavi called your family vineyard the best grapes grown in Napa Valley. Did your family appreciate that? Was that meaningful to them, or were they just farmers doing their thing? What was their focus on that?
Well, so they were very proud. Like our granddad, when he retired, he obsessed about the vineyard because he had that kind of wild energy that it needed to be focused somewhere. And so he was a perfectionist. And I think that's what Bob really appreciated back in an era where people pruned and picked and maybe sprayed it once or twice. It was not a romantic operation. And in the case of our family, like we didn't actually know that. So I was interviewing people when I was doing a historical report for the National Register. And the historian from Robert Mondavi was the one who told me that. So she said, you didn't know? Bob used to tell everyone this about your family and how much he appreciated it. So that was pretty special 40 years after the fact to deliver that message to the family. And they're very proud.
And well, they should be. And then eventually, as you said earlier, you guys started making wine, right? And your first vintage that you released, I think, was 2010?
Yep.
Yeah. That's when... this piece I didn't know, and that's when you needed that bridge, the bridge loan, so to speak, along those lines. And I read it was only 92 cases. What was the consumer reaction to that first vintage?
Well, I mean, we were, I think, 24 and 26 when we actually released our first wine. So we were still pretty naive to the situation. But I think it's important to say, along with the, education of figuring out that our family grapes and our grandfather were considered some of the best by Robert Mondavi, we didn't know a lot of this stuff getting into it. A lot of it was the sense of discovery. And, Graeme going to Davis, started learning a little bit more about To Kalon and learning more about soil. And I think one of the kind of light bulb moments was actually with the winemaker at Mondavi. Graeme called the winemaker when he was 20 years old, didn't tell her how old he was, but said, hey, we've never tasted our family's fruit before it's gotten blended, because Mondavi was always about putting together the reserve blend or whatever it might have been, and so we go in and we do barrel tastings with some of the winemaking team, and we were very fortunate that they were generous enough to do this with us. But they not only tasted us from all of the wine coming from our family's property, but all the stuff around us that was kind of the different components of the Mondavi Reserve. And at the end of it, we kind of look at each other and we're like, hey, we might be a little biased, but ours was the best, right? And so I remember Graeme asking Genevieve this question of, where does our family fit within the Mondavi program? And then, what do you think of it as a winemaker? And you can see her pause and kind of think through, like, should I tell these kids the truth or not? And she says, not only is your family vineyard my favorite fruit to work with, but it's literally been the core of Mondavi's best blends all the way back since the inception of the winery in 1966. So we both looked at each other and kind of were like, well, if we can't make a good wine, we know it's not the vineyard's fault. It kind of pushed us on this path of having the confidence to say, like, hey, what could we do if this wine was made from just the core of some of these wines that helped shape Napa? Of course, the next big step is how do you get people to actually be interested in buying it? And our whole philosophy was word of mouth. We just wanted to meet cool people, share the wine, have them tell their friends, and kind of grow organically through that thing. And we kind of drastically underestimated the power of the internet at that time, because there was some buzz on a couple different blog sites, and the Parker board was really active back then. And there's a wine website called Wine Berserkers, which has a lot of passionate wine enthusiasts on there. And so there were some people talking about the wine, and it was at a time, this would have been 2013, where a lot of these consumers were like, oh, like, do we really need another Napa Cabernet in the world? And like, oh, who are these two young kids thinking that they can do it? And I think one of the most amazing things that Graeme and I still kind of lean on is, a bunch of people in the industry kind of stepped up and started saying really nice things. And, we had some winemakers from all sorts of different parts say, hey, actually, I've tried these wines. These are two really great young guys, and the quality is exceptional. And, a lot of them said, hey, I don't usually buy a lot of wine. I'm buying their first release. Yeah. So it really created a nice buzz. And the thing that was kind of wild with only 92 cases and no sales history, we said, hey, let's just send it out to everybody that signed up for the mailing list so far. And hopefully we can, sell enough wine that first month to make sure our check doesn't bounce. And we send the email out, and literally 25 minutes later, the entire vintage had sold. Amazing. So it was one of the most exciting, humbling experiences, I think, in both of our lives, and especially in our, beginning stages of career path.
Yeah. And Graeme, was the vision for making the wine clear from day one for what you wanted to do?
So back to that story at Mondavi, tasting with Genevieve, like, you have those ethereal experiences when you taste certain wines, and that wine tasted like home. It tasted like a grandfather's attention to detail. It's like it was like, oh my God, that's the holy grail, the model. And so I think we've always had like a open mind in regards to approaching it from a stylistic question, because we had a lot of people say, oh, well, you need to make this style because Robert Parker's still a critic and it should match his palate. And so because I had done all that pre-experimenting in the dorm room at school, I sort of knew what we wanted to make, and it wasn't the popular thing at the time. It was balance and restraint, right. and we have a naturally powerful site. We don't need to over accentuate that. So we really stuck to making what we wanted to drink. And the Field of Dreams analogy is, if you build it, they will come, was probably pretty strong at the time in our psyche. And so we really hope that we just find people that like the kinds of wines of tons of structure and interesting components versus what was popular at the time.
Well, you've done it, because certainly from my perspective, it's just a wonderful wine, and you've hit exactly that style, and you stuck with what you believe in. That's the beauty of wine. There's no right or wrong answer here, right? It's what you want to make. There's people who like a different style, but there's plenty of people who love this style of wine, including me. So that's fantastic. And coming to the earlier comment, Alex, also, where you were talking about how helpful the wine industry was, that's one of the things I love about the industry. It's a really supportive industry, and everyone looks out for each other, and it makes it. I find everyone from the winemakers to the wine consumers to be really nice, interesting people, and it's just a pleasure to get to know more and more and explore this world that we live in. This episode is brought to you by the Wine Market Journal. If you buy, sell, or collect fine wine, you already know that information matters. I've been in the fine wine business for more than 40 years. The Wine Market Journal is my one source of truth. It tracks actual market prices, not opinions, not asking prices, real auction transaction data from across the globe. Plus, it has great filtering capabilities, so you can easily see the data that is relevant for you. I spent decades in the auction business, and I can tell you, understanding market value changes the game. If you're making decisions in fine wine, make informed ones. Visit winemarketjournal.com to learn more. Plus, Uncorkers can get 10% off their first year of a standard, premium, or professional annual subscription. Just enter Uncorking in the promo code field at checkout. Alex, you're running the business side of the business. How do you make pricing and distribution decisions when the demand wildly outstrips the supply?
Yeah, great question. I mean, Graeme and I talk about all this stuff together. There's no decisions that get made on that
For
sort
sure.
of stuff unless we're both on the same page. But when we first started, we did a price analysis of all of the wines within a mile of our property. This would have been back in like 2012. But then we did a price analysis of all the wines we kind of wanted to be, in some ways in the conversation about qualitatively and everything that we valued in Napa wine. And what was kind of amazing was the average price per bottle back then was already over $200. And for two young guys that, nobody'd ever heard of, I mean, obviously having a vineyard right in the heart of To Kalon doesn't hurt when it comes to credibility and the history with the Mondavis. But we kind of looked around and said, well, what do we need to price this at to run a successful business, but also, not kind of deter people from wanting to open it and drink it. And one of the wines that was very popular at the time was Schrader, and they were $175. So we were kind of looking at, all the different options and slowly but surely kind of decided, I think 150 is a nice number for our inaugural release. And, on the business side, it's funny because, people are saying, oh, you're either underpriced or overpriced. And then we do the release and it sells out in 25 minutes. And there's only one way to look at it there is like we were underpriced, but but I actually think realistically we were perfectly priced because it gave us a chance for people to be excited about it, and we were able to keep that price for a little over 5 years just to build loyalty from the customer base. And then every price increase we've taken since then has just been based off of cost of goods and inflation. So I think one of the things Graeme and I always really value is how do you make sure that the people that are supporting us are excited about the wines. And a lot of people in the wine industry, whether it's Napa or other places, have just kind of gotten, focused on price increases for just the, maybe greed or ego or whatever it might be.
And looking at what their neighbor's selling wine for. And,
and if you look at the neighbor's warehouse, it's filled with their wine that they can't sell.
Exactly.
So, you got to get to the bottom of the story before you follow the leader, right? But I think our intention with just two people is, we don't have to pay a top consulting winemaker, GM, hospitality staff. It keeps our costs a lot lower. So we've been able to keep this price fair and in sense of value for Napa Valley, which is kind of crazy to say, while still running a successful business, which is, helping support us and our family, which is something to be.
And if somebody wants to get on the mailing list, what do you tell them?
Well, our mailing list is through the website, and we don't want anybody to be deterred from signing up for it. So our goal is to share the wine with everybody who's interested, but we're very fortunate that the demand is very much exceeding the supply at the moment. But that's a kind of testament of keeping the pricing fair. And if we were like right now, our bottle price is $225, and I would say the amount of people that want to buy our wine at $225, might go out to here, but you go to 3, 4, 5, 6, that list gets smaller and smaller. So we're not trying to be overly exclusive or hard to get. We just want to make sure that people are excited about what we're doing, get a chance to enjoy it in any way possible.
We should add that we want people to drink the wine. I think once those prices get too high, it becomes something that just trades around and nobody ever drinks it. And by the time someone does drink it, it's been traveled 3 or 4 times across the country. So I think it's really important to us not to have sort of the screaming eagle issue, which I think it's become like a sort of this stock, and people have a hard time justifying opening a bottle. And so while I love their model and how they've created such an interesting demand for their wine, like we're only relevant if people are drinking it and sharing it with friends. So that's really important to not scale the price to some level that we start losing relationships we've been building for 15 years.
Right.
Yeah, and I think one more final thing, which I think is rare, which it shouldn't be in more of the California wine world, is like our whole goal is to pass this down to our kids and grandkids and hopefully have them have the same excitement and interest that Graeme and I were able to, achieve through learning more about the family history and quality of the wines. And if you're trying to be around for a long, long time, you're not worried about how to make the most money in the next 5 years. You're how do you stay sustainable and thoughtful for the next 50 to 100. So that's where our pricing model kind of continues to stand. Is we don't want to make the most money right now. We want to be around for a long time.
Yeah, you guys are stewards of the land, right? You're fourth generation stewards of this land, right? And this is the way to maintain it for a long time. But yet you're still, I believe your family is still selling some grapes to other to other wines, right?
Yeah, so we've always sold, like Graeme mentioned earlier, to Robert Mondavi Winery. And when we first got started, what was nice was we got to take a little bit to learn and experience and try to figure out stylistically what we want to do. But we could kind of keep creeping up more and more as we got to where we wanted to qualitatively. And it's just Graeme and I. Like nobody touches the wine besides for Graeme, and so there is a limit based off of what we can do ourselves.
Until one of your kids come in the business, right?
Well, we'll see how helpful their hands are. Graham's 10-year-old daughter has been trying to help out a little bit, and she seems to be very much, coming from the same tree as Graeme of being focused on, plants and agriculture. So we're excited about opportunity to share with the next generation. But I think for us, our goal was always to get to about 500 cases. That was the business model of like, hey, if we can get to that number and do it all ourselves, it's a good business, but it's also small enough to have that attention to detail. And I think Graeme and I talk about it almost every single year of, hey, can we make a little bit more wine, share with more people? Are we happy where we're at? And those decisions are all based off quality versus what the demand would be. It always makes sense to sell a little bit of grapes for us right now, just because the entire vineyard would make probably like 1,500 cases.
And that's more than, makes total sense. And Graeme, more on the wine side again, what I remember hearing is that you believe that, which makes total sense, that doing less makes the wine taste more like a place.
I had a friend in the industry recommend me this book. It's called The One Straw Revolution. It's a Japanese rice and citrus farmer, and he's in the 70s. He was part of the organic and sort of cultural movement in Japan, which, as you can imagine, as a culture, is not very tolerant of those kinds of countercultural ideas. So when I read that book, I totally obsessed with the idea of like, if you ever had a wild blackberry from your creek and that vitality and freshness in your mouth, like I can taste it when I explain it. And that's kind of the goal, is like, if Mother Nature plays the bigger role and we only do what's absolutely necessary, it's going to have that vitality and freshness to it. So when I took over the farming in 2012, I basically just started eliminating things. It was we haven't fertilized the vineyard in 30 years. We started eliminating all these inputs that the previous farming companies were doing.
Right.
And I think the wines have just gotten more and more pure throughout the process. So I think that's always the goal. Like Alex said earlier, is if you have a great site, it's more of a don't screw it up. And I always relate. I love food and cooking, and so a lot of winemaking is like modern cuisine, and you make food look like something and it tastes like something else, or a bunch of additives. As where if I was a chef, it would be a sashimi chef, because the ocean grows the fish, and all you're doing is presenting the fish, and hopefully a little bit of soy. Hopefully you can't taste it, but that's all you really want to impart on the wine.
Right, because so much of the hard work of making great wine is in the vineyard, right?
Yeah. That's where all of our stylistic decisions take place. How many leaves, how you manage the heat spells and whatever other things Mother Nature throws your way. So that's what maintains the style, and it makes what we do in the winery much more of a guiding process, just not letting it go off any cliffs.
Right. And how are you changing things to adapt for climate change?
So I'm married to a scientist, and so we're not allowed to talk about climate change at the table because everyone gets too stressed out. But we're lucky in that our vineyard's planted to the old classic traditional California sprawl. So it's like the drooping canopies, bush vines like you'd see in old Napa or parts of Australia. And so that intrinsically helps manage sun exposure, which is the big problem. It's like really a heat spell of radiating heat cooks your fruit, and then your fruit is all of a sudden fruit cocktail. So I'm a big fan of the old traditional methods. The old timers surprisingly knew a lot about what they were doing, and
they had many years of practice to figure it out. Right?
Yep. Yeah, and that's why I love history too. Is like you can learn more from doing that versus coming out of school and thinking you know better and changing everything. We in our vineyard, each generation's planted a vineyard block. And so the block we planted next to the cottage is it's behind Alex, is exactly the same way as our great grandparents.
I remember Alex and I sat there at lunch, right? We had a great with the family. It was very nice.
So we have a block from our great grandparents, which was planted in 1954. So that's 72-year-old vines. We have 7.5 acres planted by our grandfather from 1974. So those are 52. And then we call these our young vines, but we have a 30-year-old section that was our mom's generation with the help of the Mondavi family. But for us to be able to source from vineyards that are, a lot of the, blocks older than we are is a testament to the family stewardship. And not only with the head train canopies, but all the 50 and 70-year-old stuff was raised to be dry farms. So as we're seeing warmer weather or just more extremes, I think our vineyard's set up to be maybe one of the most sustainable you'll find anywhere planted in Napa right now. The challenge is the older the vine gets, the less fruit it's going to produce, so that people, think it's less economical. But qualitatively, it's like we just don't even think about replanting unless there's virus or disease. And the goal is farming for longevity to ensure that we can pass these old vines down to the next generation as well.
Yeah, it's great. And that's what gives the, well, let's roll right into To Kalon. This vineyard, why is this vineyard such a mythical vineyard in Napa? Or why is it such a mythical vineyard?
So it starts with the geology, because I made this mistake of I was on a panel at the Oakville wine growers, and I talked about the human legacy, and I was reading a book about Mennonite farmers, and there was this line in there that described what it's like to be part of a multi-generational family vineyard, and it was that you don't start raising a child at birth, but 100 years before they're born, because that's when you shape the environment they're born into.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, I thought I had nailed it, the explanation. Then the geologist stands up and says, I disagree with Graeme. It started 140 million years ago. Yeah. So fair enough. But To Kalon's on an alluvial fan, which is like, think of a big canyon. It's all the erosion and rocks from the canyon that then deposit under the ground. And so we're located at the apex of that. So we're the rockiest part of all of To Kalon. And so we get these very deep roots that tap into the earth while having extreme water stress. So the vines, instead of focusing on growing leaves, they focus on ripening their fruit because they think they're not going to live very long. So that's what creates that concentration and power naturally, which is really special. And I think the other important thing is the history. Like To Kalon in the 1800s, pre-prohibition, was the most awarded winery in the entire Napa Valley in America. It was winning awards in Bordeaux against the great chateaus. It was sort of the creme de la crop of California wine. And after Prohibition, it fell apart. Then it was resurrected by a man named Martin Stelling, then Robert Mondavi. And so the way I like to describe it is in every era of Napa history, To Kalon's been famous. So it's if you started your vineyard 20 years ago and you're saying, I'm a Grand Cru or First Growth, you don't really have the context to whether it's stylistically impressive or if it like is actually the site and the longevity. So in our case, we're very lucky because To Kalon has just been this pinnacle of quality. And the best thing about the whole thing is in the 1800s, it was not famous for Cabernet. It was other varieties.
Really?
Zinfandel, Refosco was the most famous wine. So if you really want to talk about what makes a place special, it's the varietal doesn't matter. You can make great wine regardless. So pretty cool.
I also have clearly, and I read this also, clearly your history, one of your passions is history, Graeme. I was a history major. I love history. I interviewed Laura Catena out of Argentina, and her sister has done all kinds of history of the Malbec. Lafleur, I interviewed them. They've got all kinds of history of their grapes. It's a fascinating history. And I'm supposed to be uncorking what's next, but looking at all this history it's a fascinating part of it all. So it's great that you've done this research on your vineyard as well, the vineyard where you guys work.
We should uncork the past.
Yes, there you go. Okay, that'll be my sister podcast. I'll do that. Yeah. But I also know To Kalon has a real contested name. There's issues going on with the licensing of the name. Can you share some of that as well? What's going on there?
So when I got interested in doing a deep dive into the historical research, I found out thanks we have a monastery located down the street from us, and Brother Roger came up to me one day and was like, Graeme, I've found the meaning of To Kalon. And I was like, oh, really? Like, what do you mean? And he said he was reading the Greek Bible in Greek, which was already impressive.
Yes, and, show off.
Yeah, and at the wedding at Cana, where Jesus turns water into wine, it is called the To Kalon. So that's the origin story. Nobody knew that. Bob Mondavi thought it was a Native American term. So you could just see how there's like there hadn't been a lot of like deep research into the origin, and so back to my love of genealogy of the land and connecting through history, I just became obsessed. I didn't have a lot to do at the time because we weren't making very much wine. So it's, I think my hobby became historical research. So I was finding old wine bottles from To Kalon, old signs, letterheads, and I got really interested in all that stuff. So I was like, well, what do I do with it? So I was going to do a National Register nomination, which I did eventually. But I started with a historic American landscape survey. So it's a part of the National Park Service where you can document and have it peer reviewed your history, and then it lives in the Library of Congress for 500 years. So that's, if
Wow.
anybody wants to read 60 pages of very intense historical documentation, they're welcome to go online and find it. But I just became like obsessed with the history. We did the National Register nomination, named a creek that runs past our little cottage, To Kalon Creek, and we started to realize something was wrong. About 2.5 years later, we got a call from the Board of Geographic Names regarding the creek, and they said that lawyers had been flying in from New York every month to their meetings, saying that the creek was erroneously named. And so I'm like, oh my God, what do you mean? Who's sending lawyers? And they said Constellation Brands, who owns Robert Mondavi. So I'm like, well, did you check your files? Because Constellation wrote a letter of support when we named the creek. And they said, yeah, we showed that to them, and they're saying you forged it. So Alex and I sort of were like, oh my God, what's going to happen? So we talked to the GM at Mondavi, who's an old family friend and been there for 40 years. And he invites us to a meeting at Mondavi to go discuss all this stuff and try to come to some resolution. And Alex had told me as we walked in, he's like, oh yeah, this was your hobby. I'll support you. Whatever happens, like it's all fine. And we enter the room, and he'd flown in the legal team from Constellation from New York. So there were like 4 suited lawyers on a circular table with our friend like nervously tapping in the corner.
This is like out of a movie, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they offered us licensing rights. So like, even though we've made up every To Kalon wine that's ever existed, ours, if we put it on our label, they sue us because Bob trademarked it in the 1990s. So it's a weird like IP issue. And the unfortunate thing was, the reason they wanted to take away the creek and the National Register and probably 1,000 hours of historical work I've done is because they wanted to franchise it, is what they told us. So start a To Kalon Vineyard in Sonoma and maybe elsewhere in the future.
Oh.
So obviously that's not what you tell someone who's spent all that time trying to document it, so it could actually be sort of the foundation for a grand cru or something more important. So after offering us licensing rights, I took like a 10-second pause, looked at Alex, who was ghost white. It's like, oh my God, what's about to happen? And I turned to the head lawyer and told her our integrity is not for sale.
Brilliant.
And so we spent the last 5 years single-handedly, no lawyers on our side. I just do it at home, defending the concept of place in American wine as Constellation is attempting to dismantle it.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. And so it's still going on.
Yeah. So the creek name was vacated. Unfortunately, I was out in DC a couple months ago arguing against that, and they were able to argue that their New York office didn't write that letter, and therefore it wasn't an official letter because Robert Mondavi's team wrote it. And then a bunch of lobbyists got involved, and I would go into these meetings with, again, like the $1,500 an hour lawyers. So a little bit outmatched, but definitely stood up and repeated those lines to these groups. And I just hope that these kinds of things are inspiration for the next generation to not the important thing is everybody thinks David always wins.
Yeah.
But
no.
But I think that's not the case. But you want people to stand up to these kind of things. If you love wine and you care about place and you care about Napa Valley becoming a world-class wine region in that sense, you can't let these gigantic corporations take away our cultural history and use it for monetary gain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing to add into it, just to give some overall clarity, is To Kalon's become one of the most famous, well-recognized vineyards, not just in Napa, but the United States and arguably in the world, because of all that history, because of all the great accolades that these wines have gotten dating back to the 1800s. And, wine regions all over the world have different ideas of how to document vineyards. And, you go to Bordeaux and it's about the Chateau, and, Chateau Margaux can buy their neighbor. It becomes first growth. You go to Burgundy and it's all, Grand Cru, Premier Cru, Village. Like, it's very much set towards the terroir and the vineyard. And right now in the United States, there's kind of this battle of, well, we all talk about our vineyards like they're, designated, but everybody's kind of looking at trademarks saying, well, I own the name, so do I really have to be stuck to the boundaries of where this geology matters or where the history is coming from? And when you start kind of pushing the boundaries in that way, you really lose what makes wine special. And Graeme's done such an amazing job documenting the history that, even if some of these legal battles don't go the way that we want to, documenting the history for the future generations hopefully make sure that the stories and the truth of it all is there for people to make their own decisions.
Yeah, and education, so that then the future generations hopefully manage it better and protect it better. Because I'm sure Robert Mondavi didn't want what Constellation. That would be my guess, at least. I'm not sure at all. My guess is, he'd be supporting. My guess is he'd be supporting your side.
Yeah, we always lament that he's gone, because I think that this would have all been resolved very quickly and amicably. And when Margaret was still alive, I was interviewing her for these historical projects, and she gave me a signed version of her memoir and book. And in it, she inscribed, "For Graeme, keep the To Kalon story alive." And so usually at the end of these presentations, I like to remind people of that, is that the Mondavis wanted to see their legacy protected, not exploited. Right. And we've had a ton of support from the families through all this. The Mondavis have written beautiful letters to these boards about the integrity and the importance of integrity in the wine business. And in Alex and I's case, it's really, I think, the reason a lot of Napa has lost the young consumer is this authenticity question. Like, you have to relate to people and be honest with them. Marketing is not an excuse to tell lies or to exploit things and try to get people's money. So I think it really boils down to people who stand up for what's right and try to protect it for the next generation.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yep, very exciting. Thank you so much. That's great. That's really important work that you're doing. So I appreciate that. I feel that the MacDonald wines are really somewhat unique personally in Napa, right? I just find they're really intentionally restrained. And I'm assuming that it's intentional. Let me say it that way. Yeah. That's intentional what you do, which is, because it's interesting, because I look at your history. You worked at many different wineries. You worked at Opus One and Colgan. Your resume spans a lot of things. But did you naturally head towards this type of winemaking? Was it the vineyard that drove you this way? Was it just your instincts?
So after working at the fancy Napa places, I had set up an internship in France that fell through due to visas and not being able to compete with French people searching for the same job. So I ended up in natural wine, and then after natural wine with some friends, my mentor who sent me there said, "Now you're unemployable and nobody's going to hire you." And he was absolutely true. I think I interviewed like 3 or 4 assistant winemaker jobs, and 2 of them got down onto my resume. Yeah, you're not getting anywhere near our wines with that. And it's such a shame, because that's where the real education happened, because a lot of winemaking is very conservative. Don't take risks. You don't want the wine to spoil. It's too expensive. And so I learned how to push everything to the limits, because I think what makes the most interesting wines are the impact of the yeast and the nature, and wine doesn't need to be perfectly clean. It needs to have nuance and things. So that really influenced me in regards to taking the next step. And then starting MacDonald was it's fun because we got to experiment, and then ultimately we came up with something that we thought was unique, and that was the point, not to make something that people recognize as anything other than coming from this place.
What would happen, speaking of Bordeaux, I've wondered this, if I'm sure it's actually happened, but if they served your wines blind in Bordeaux?
Oh yeah, well, there's. I think that's the testament is, when your wines get put at the table with the best wines in the world. Bob Mondavio has said, "Hey, I want Napa Valley wines and Robert Mondavi wines to be at the best table in the world." And blind tasting is one of the most humbling things that could ever exist. And so we've had our wines get put at different events, and one of them was Antonio Galoni from Venice did a retrospect of 2010, and I think there was like 16 different wines, but he puts one wine in there that's blind, and we had no idea this was happening, but it ended up being the 2010 that he'd purchased from us. And I got all these emails from people the next day, like, "Oh my God, I had your wine at this dinner. It was exceptional. It was one of my favorite wines I've tasted." And I'm like, man, what was this dinner? There's a lot of people were at this one dinner last night. And it turned out that Antonio had shared the wine blind, and it blew everybody away. And then there was another great story of, it was one of the first people we ever had by the vineyard. It was a father and a son. And the son only liked drinking Napa Cabernet, and the father really, really loved Bordeaux. And so they would always go to family events and have their own separate wines to drink because they didn't like the same stuff. And they ended up tasting our wine, and the dad looked at his son. He says, "I think this is going to be the first wine we get to drink together."
Oh my God,
So
that's great.
I think the thing about our wines, and of course, the goal is to make a wine that's site specific, but also vintage specific. So we're not trying to manipulate anything to taste one way. It's what Mother Nature gives us is kind of what the goal is for that year. But I think based off our site and Graeme's farming approach and winemaking approach, he mentioned earlier, but it truly does have balance. And I think balance gets thrown around as a word a little bit too much in the wine industry. But I think we have the fruit that makes people who love Napa go, "Oh my gosh, this is so delicious." But it's like that pure blackberry fruit that Graeme was mentioning earlier. But it also has great minerality and great structure and a beautiful tannin, component that's going to allow it to age really well. So it checks a lot of different boxes. So it seems like it's kind of bridged the gap between people that'll say, "Hey, I only drink this," or "I only drink that." So it's been lucky when you have everybody saying nice things. You don't have to work as hard.
I'm sure you guys work plenty hard anyway. But I will say the balance. Having the two of you on here together, your balance reflects perfectly. I'm not surprised why your wines are so balanced, because you guys clearly are very integrated in how you do things, right? And that really shows. Thank you for being on the show. We have a couple last questions that I like to ask at the end. I'd like to ask of both of you as well. Please share an early memory that drew you into wine.
All right. Well, we were talking about family. This is one that I always love. Graeme mentioned earlier that our grandmother was part of the inspiration. Our grandfather, he passed away in 1997, so I was only 11 years old. But our grandmother lived to be 97 years old. She passed away in 2014. So we got a lot more time to spend with her, which we were very fortunate for. But I remember there was a moment. I think it was the 2008 vintage, which was one of the first Graeme's made, that we felt like, man, this is really great. We want to share it with people. And so we ended up opening a bottle with the family one night. And as our grandmother got older and older, her short-term memory got to be a little bit weaker, but her long-term memory was perfect. And she had a routine pretty much every day where she'd have cocktail hour at 5:30 with a vodka tonic. And then she'd usually have 2 glasses of white wine. And it was almost always Robert Mondavi Fumé Blanc, because they got the best discount on those. And one day we put a glass of the 2008, what would have been MacDonald, and she looks at the table and she goes, "Wait, why is there a glass of red wine in front of me?" And we go, "Grandma, just try it, And she takes a sip and she goes, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is delicious. What is it?" And we go, "Well, this is the wine that Graeme's been making from the family vineyard, and we just wanted to share with everyone." She goes, "Oh, I knew I liked it for a great reason." 5 minutes later, she goes, "Why is there a glass of red wine in front of me?" So we got to relive that moment over and over, which still to me is one of the most amazing kind of validations of the hard work that was put into it.
How special. That's wonderful. And from your grandmother, what a wonderful memory. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Graeme, an early memory or
That's probably one of the best ones. That would be my number one. But the one that really strikes me is, so after that first release where we sold the wine, I didn't know what to do with myself, because it's like, all right, the wine's sold. So I get in the car and I start going up to the winery where we were making the wine at the Consgards at the time. And so I'm driving up and it just hits me like, we started this business and our dad had gotten sick at the time and passed away before he ever got to taste it. So that's why grandmother was so important. But it was just, it hit me all in that drive up to work. I was like, oh, he would have been so proud. It all came together. And I just feel like that multi-generational element of this business is so strong, because we can make wine from old vines because these generations put them in the ground for us. So we're very, very connected to that.
Yeah, fantastic. And please share one piece of advice for someone who feels they don't belong in wine.
Oh man, I think everybody should belong in wine in one way or another. I think there's always been this challenge of the barrier entry. Like, people think that the wine industry can be pretentious, but and farming is one of the most humbling things in the world. So you talk to anybody actually doing the farming, and nobody's pretentious at all.
You guys certainly are not.
But I tell people this all the time: is it starts with, do you like it or do you not like it? Anybody can try a glass of wine and make that determination. And I think the step from that point is, what do you like about it and what do you not like about it? And that's where the journey starts. And you can go as far as you want to go with that. And people like us, we've deep dive into all the intricacies of the wine industry, and I'm sure most of the people listening to your podcast are probably on the geeky side of wine like we are, so they've figured out what they like and what they don't like. But just keep going down the path of figuring out what resonates with you, and don't let anybody else tell you that you shouldn't like certain things, or keep you from kind of figuring out what about wine resonates and is special to you.
It's about humility. It's go find the farmers, and that's where you'll have those really incredible deep connections to wine. There's no reason to be pretentious or intimidating about enjoying wine. I know my mother-in-law's always worried about how she phrases things to people, and I just say, just tell them it's delicious.
Yeah,
that's the safe word.
Yes, and for people who aren't so nerdy in the industry, they get anxious around us sometimes. So that's exactly right. It just doesn't matter. If you like it, that's all that matters, right? Like it, drink it, and enjoy it.
And I think another thing that's important to put in there is, you can find great wines at all price points.
It's
not about the most expensive wines are always the best. There's a lot of great wines from all over the world, and some places in Europe have been doing it for hundreds of years, and they've owned the land and chateaus forever. Like, they can make amazing wines and charge different things, just like Graeme and I can charge different prices because we do our own work. So it's find where that fits for you, and make sure you're getting the best thing that resonates with your palate.
Exactly. I think that's great. So Graeme and Alex, thank you so much for being on the show, Uncorking What's Next. Greatly appreciate your time, and greatly appreciate that you guys are quietly making some of the most thoughtful wines I find in Napa and in the United States, and probably throughout the world. So thank you both very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for including us and giving us a chance to share our story with all your listeners.
Thanks, Jeff.
This podcast is sponsored by the Durant Corks Group. If you enjoy mature wine as much as I do, you know how challenging older corks can be. Even with experience, they don't always cooperate. I still remember the first time I saw a Durant in use back in 2012. I was gobsmacked. It solved a problem I and every serious wine drinker has faced. It is as close to foolproof as I've ever found for opening bottles of wine with older corks, and now I keep 3 of them on hand. Here at Uncorking What's Next, we're giving a Durant away. Just share with me the story of what made you fall in love with wine. You can share it by email or Instagram. Over the summer, we'll be picking the best story to share on the podcast, and that person will win a Durant. And if you'd rather not wait, you can order the Durant directly at www.thedurant.com. Well, you've made it to the end of the episode. Thank you for listening all the way through. I've already gotten some nice feedback, which I greatly appreciate. And I also want to welcome your feedback as well. Please email me or send me a message on LinkedIn or Instagram. Share with me if you like the show, what I can do better, and any guests or subjects you think would be interested. I'm really curious. Plus, if you like the show, I will be grateful if you rate it. I, Jeff Zachariah, am the producer of this show. I'm still connected with Zacky's Auctions as a consultant and auctioneer and helping to bring in consignments. But this podcast is not in any way connected with Zacky's. I also want to thank everyone who's made this podcast possible. I want to thank my daughter, Josephine Zachariah, my son and his wife, Tom and Alyssa Zachariah. All 3 are in the wine business, and I'm grateful for their thoughts and insights. My good friend, Christian Kuipers, for the artwork. My daughter by choice, Hannah Tobias, for the music. Soraya Perry, editor. Amelia Lankus, social media and marketing. My YPO Forum for the continued encouragement to step out of my comfort zone and make this podcast. And finally, for my amazing wife, Frederique, for her continued and constant support. Thank you.